The last week of the regular season is upon us in most of our leagues, and we really have to nail our lineups this time. I'm Jeff Pomazal, and welcome to the IDP After Show Week 14 preview episode. If you're fighting for a playoff spot, trying to lock up a bye, or maybe just trying to play a spoiler in your leagues and have some lineup questions, you're in the right place. Joining me this time is Ryan Noonan, who is the betting content manager and all things IDP over at 4for4 Football. And in this podcast, we're going to be breaking down why we like Payton and Eric Wilson, no relation, this week as two linebackers to really fire up in your lineups this week. We're also telling you that even though Josh Sweat of the Arizona Cardinals has been kind of on a heater lately, this might be the week to get him out of your lineup, and the reasons why it might just surprise you. All that and a lot more on this episode of the IDP After Show.
This is the IDP After Show.
Ryan, before we break down this week's players in a little more detail, I want to pick your brain a little bit, if that's okay. When you're looking at building your weekly lineup in whatever league that you're playing in, are you looking for like safe plays for week 14? Are you looking for upside plays in week 14? Is it a combination of that, or is it something completely different?
It's a really good question, Jeff. We're talking about it a little bit before we recorded today, and it's, sometimes a challenge for us in this space in terms of even building content is the different dynamics of our league, right? That could be roster requirement related. It could be scoring setting related. At this time of year, when we're looking at week 14 in particular, as we kind of, playoffs are coming, it really would matter where I am in the standings as well, right? Like if I want to, I need to not only get a win, but I also need to, catch someone that's a handful of points ahead of me. I probably need to swing for the fences a little bit, right? I need a little bit more, not necessarily like sacrificing floor, but I want to swing for the ceiling a little bit more. Overall, I feel like I'm probably going to be a little bit more conservative. A lot of the stuff I do and how I even stumbled into this space was through the betting side of things and through tackles. And I do think that the tackles are the most bankable asset that we have, really, regardless of position. Obviously, that's a little bit more prevalent in linebacker and even safety and, the alignment pieces that impact that on the defensive line, who's playing on early downs and what some base tackle rates and some of that stuff is, I think, it matter too. So I think those are the things that we really want to lean on because at the same time, like, you never want to take a zero, even though you're, swinging for the fence. So I think we have a couple of guys today that I think are high upside, but zero is very much in the range of potential outcomes, and we really can't afford that in week 14.
Are you more willing to take risk earlier in the season when you have like more time to kind of make that up in leagues, or are you kind of the same type of player throughout your season?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, waiver wire, way more aggressive early, right? There's a lot of things that we don't know what we don't know. And I think locking into your priors, your preseason priors, there's a lot of speculation on who we think wins jobs and who we think has the green dot heading into camp. But like, this guy who actually has not even been a part because he's missing OTAs, like he's actually the guy. What we're talking about is the number 2 and number 3. So I think being able to be pliable early in the season, not locking in and thinking like it all is really, really important. I also think that kind of progresses as we get into the early part of the season as well, as like situations change, right? Like we see new coordinators come in, and like while that player might be in the same role, like Jaquan Brisker is a great example, right? Like he's in the same role theoretically, but the alignment for what we see here on a man-heavy defense versus a box-heavy zone defense is a very different outcome, right? So staying pliable to what's actually happening, and not even necessarily results-based, more so like playing time and alignment-based. I think it's really important to be aggressive early and adapt and not lock in because you're like, oh, you know what, I have 50% of this guy in best ball, and like he's my guy this year, and you can leave yourself in a real vulnerable spot and manage season-long leagues where you still have that 50% of that guy in best ball or whatever decide off-season stuff you were doing in dynasty or whatnot. You got to be able to be pliable and move on based off of what we know, and I think that's where you can get yourself in trouble if you're kind of locking into priors.
And I think that's a great thing because I was guilty of that last year. Like you have your flag plants, like your ride or die, and like you almost are willing this player to be good. And right. Sometimes it hurts to like peel that Band-Aid off a little bit. Like, oh, I really missed, so
we like to be right, and it feels good when you're right and the guy performs, but at the same time, it feels better to win. So we want to make sure we do what puts us in position to do that.
Ryan, without getting too deep into the onion peels here, what goes into determining those types of plays? Are you looking at snap count? Are you looking at snap alignment? Are you looking at like scheme fit versus, like we talked about, is it a zone or man-to-man kind of defensive format for those offensive pieces and things like that? What kind of goes into your ranks or your projections in that regard?
Yeah, it's all tied into it a little bit. I mean, if we're looking for, individual matchups, where you want to look at the, overall on, like, say, the defensive line, or, edge rushers, whatnot, want to, get an understanding of obviously the pressure rate that they can get as a unit. We know that sacks are very fleeting. Oftentimes, you can benefit from a significantly better teammate next to you creating pressure, and someone can run into you, right? So we might be able to say individually that, Isaiah McGuire has a great matchup this week. Well, you know what? Isaiah McGuire is going to get a lot of one-on-ones because his teammate on the other side is drawing a lot of extra attention. He's getting doubled. He's getting chipped. And there's situations where maybe like Isaiah McGuire's great matchup and Myles Garrett getting chipped leaves, Mason Graham with more one-on-ones than he would typically see on the inside. So, trying to have a really holistic, 50,000 foot view of the scheme defense matchup against the offense. What's the pressure to sack rate at the quarterback, right? Not only like how often they're getting sacked, how often they're getting pressured, how often those pressures getting converted into sacks. We do know more so than ever with advanced analytics, sacks really are, if you're going to drill it down to one thing, they are really a quarterback sack stats. So like we do see that change in like chase players as they go to other teams and other systems as well. So really trying to hone in on that from a like big play defensive line perspective, right? Because those guys are offering us a lower tackle floor most weeks. Anytime we're getting into linebackers, I want you on the field for probably 90% of the snaps. Ideally, unless you're like a real high performer that can get away with, something in say the 80 to 85% snap rate. I'd like you to be efficient, some tackles for loss. Some big play stuff. I know you have some guys highlighted, I think, that fit that bill. This week that we're going to get into safety, defensive backs. We know how just year to year, especially at corner, how unpredictable that is. Your bad cornerbacks that actually produce a lot of tackles for us are often because they're targeted a lot, which doesn't keep them on the field long term, right? So like it's this like real chicken and egg situation where it's like, well, yeah, if you're a really good IDP corner, that probably means you're oftentimes maybe an average or below average corner, right? We know how unpredictable interceptions are, pick sixes, right? We had the Deron Bland stuff a couple of years ago where that was insane. But if you're trying to like catch that in a bottle, you're really, really going to be missing the mark. So we want box safeties, right? We want nickel, the Jalen Peters of the world where like, hey, he's going to get some slot snaps that puts him in the box and creates more opportunities for him to get a higher tackle floor, but he's also going to stay on the field in, jumble formations or things like that. So, alignment at defensive back is a huge piece of it.
Yep. Yeah. We love our IDP sweet spot. That's gold right there. So we love that. So last thing here, Ryan, before we get started on the episode here, what's your favorite type of league to play in?
I did a guillotine league for the first time this year and absolutely loved it. So that's going to be a bigger off-season venture for me next year. I think I was kind of surprised at my league mates and their approach. I felt like I was correct in the moment. As I went with the really high floor linebackers, the league requirements there were no positional requirements outside of one team defense. So I was like, well, I'm just going to take a defense with the last pick and I'm just going to jam linebackers. And it was great. I got knocked out 2 weeks ago, but I had the highest points in the league by far. That's kind of the nature of guillotine. It doesn't really matter. You just got to not be the lowest that week. I was the lowest, but I think it was a great way to get myself to a fighting spot later in the season, is to keep my floor really high as, teams feeling really good about stacking a Myles Garrett with a TJ Watt and, whatever you want to do at corner. And all of a sudden those guys are very just more apt to have not necessarily zeros, but some, low performance weeks. So guillotine, linebacker heavy approach. And I love the D-up format too, over at Fast Draft. And I was on there today and happened to see a familiar name at the top. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that gentleman seemed like someone that I recognized. So yeah, it seems like a format that you like too.
Right now, I'm really loving it. I am really loving it. Hopefully, in about 3 weeks, I'm still loving it the same.
Yeah, I don't want to jinx you. I'm just saying,
Yeah,
I saw a name that the listeners should be feeling good about getting their advice from.
Well, let's see how we do in week 14, and we'll go from there. But that sounds like a great off-season podcast to kind of jump in on, and let's circle back around June, July to do that. So
I'm in.
All right, perfect. All right, Ryan. So we're going to break down some players that were a little higher on the consensus this week. Some players that were kind of tempering expectations, maybe not totally not starting just because of like league requirements or how many you start in the league, but just players that were maybe not expecting, maybe like those projections that we sometimes see in our league formats. They have like these 13.8 points projection. We're just not expecting that from this week. And then a couple players that are just whatever reason, we just can't figure out, have scratching our head. At the defensive line position, Ryan, who is that defensive lineman this week that you are a little excited about?
Yeah, I think this is an elite matchup for probably all the Rams, really. But I think in particular at edge, and more so specifically, is going to be Byron Young. I got into this space kind of by accident, by looking to find opportunities in the betting prop market, and started building out tackle projections. And it's a huge, it's a passion of mine, a huge piece of what I do weekly now, and looking for every sort of advantage or matchup specific thing that would make me either, give some a bump or a dock based off of the matchup. And I found something specific. The Cardinals are, well, first of all, we know that there are splash play opportunities. We have Jacoby Brissett in a spot where he's probably going to drop back again roughly 40 times. He's getting the ball out pretty quickly and not taking a ton of sacks, even though he's taking on a ton of pressures. He was pressured on 53.5% of his dropbacks last week against the Buccaneers. Now they're going to blitz a lot more than the Rams are going to, but the Rams are just better one-on-one up front. So we obviously have some ceiling potential with Byron Young, getting home in a sack, but the Cardinals run off guard. So, not off tackle and not off the edge at the league's lowest rate at just 12%. So 88% of their runs are towards the outside. They're going to be towards Byron Young. They're going to be towards Jared Verse. And we know how difficult it is to have floor at edge rusher. And I think that kind of buoys the spot for the edge rushers for the Rams this week, because I think the tackle floor is going to be a little bit higher. We also have a situation where I think I have this as the most projected plays of the week. So the play volume's high. And then we have a really nice spot in terms of the scorekeeper in the desert as well. I know depending on your league scoring, sometimes more assists aren't good. In the tackle bet standpoint, we don't care if they're assists or solos, but we do have a pretty favorable assist giver outer in the desert. And again, we know it doesn't mean just because you're giving out assists doesn't mean that someone's not also getting a solo on that too. The way the rules work, you can get both. So high assists, just more meat on the bone for a little bit of everybody. So I think it's a really good spot for Byron Young, who is in top 5 for me this week at D-line.
That's fantastic. And I wonder how much of that change in running style for the Cardinals this year has to do with just the injuries that they've been decimated with at the running back position, between Trey Benson and Connor, they've been hit really, really hard at that position. And so how much is that is just a situational, or is that a scheme, an offensive scheme fit for them?
Yeah. I mean, so what jumped out to me is that the 12% off guard, there's no other team below, no other team below 20. They're full 10%, 11.5% below the next closest team. So teams that even do run a lot on the perimeter do mix in some, off guard stuff at a way higher rate than the Cardinals are. So it seems to definitely be probably a combination of both, but definitely something that I wouldn't imagine they shift to now week 14.
No, probably not changing the sauce right now. So
yeah.
Good stuff there. All right, I'm going to stick with a hot defensive unit here, and I'm going to go with the Denver Broncos, and I'm going to go with Jonathan Cooper this week. I know that his tackle numbers are a little bit down this season compared to last year, but he's still doing extremely well in the sack department with 7.5. He's only 3 sacks behind his career high that he set last year, and he still has 4 games to go, and so that's well within reach for him this year. he has an ultra talented defensive line that he plays with. So it's going to be tough to have great performances week in and week out, because we know that those edge rushers are going to have up and down games. Like you said, there's going to be games that they're going to just be in on, and some games are just going to disappear. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. The nice thing with Cooper, though, is he offers a very high floor. He has no goose egg games this season. He only has 2 games with less than 5 points in Big Three scoring. So he provides fantasy managers with a really decent floor on a weekly basis. He's got a really nice matchup this week versus the Raiders. That plus matchup and the game script could play really well into Cooper having another nice game. Last time in week 10, Cooper had 3 tackles and a half a sack. He's been a little quiet in the sack department, so he's kind of due this week. The tackles for the Raiders, DJ Glaze and Stone Forsythe, are ranked 65th and 73rd in the league respectfully at the position. So it's a really winnable matchup regardless of which side of the line he lines up on. DJ Glaze and Stone Forsythe sound a lot more like American Gladiators than they do offensive tackles in the league, but I'm kind of liking Cooper to have a nice bounce back week this week. And that record-setting pace that Denver is on is probably going to be a little help this week from Cooper.
And what's going on there right now in Las Vegas isn't a great spot. I would have considered this if you didn't meet me to the punch, because we talked about pressure to sack rate. Geno Smith is now the league leader, if that's right. I don't know if we want to say that in a positive way, right. But he leads the league in pressure to sack rate. He has passed Cam Ward and his pressure to sack rate over the last 4 weeks with some of those offensive line injuries that you were highlighting there. Is even higher. It's like 30.2%. He's taking like insane amount. I think like 25 sacks in the last 4 weeks. So yeah, this is a great spot for Cooper. Obviously Benito, but I like the Cooper call up.
Awesome. All right, let's switch to our linebackers this week. And we got a pair of Wilson brothers, no relation this week. Which Wilson are you taking at the linebacker spot?
Yeah, this is contingent on Patrick Queen sitting out. I will note that he missed practice on Wednesday. It's the same glute and hip injury that forced him out last week against the Bills. Looks positive. Feel pretty good about it. I am desperate, Jeff, for full-time Payton Wilson. I think we all are. I mean, who needs ACLs if you just, rack up tackles? He's 11th in combined tackles on the season, despite playing by far the fewest snaps, played less than 600 snaps in the season. Everyone else that's in the top like 20 tackles are, approaching 700 plus snaps already. So his like 17.5% tackle rate, absolutely insane. Can get it done. His tackle rate even better against the pass. Obviously, you'll probably see that a little less against Baltimore this week, but still a great matchup. Baltimore going to be a run-heavy situation, as they always are. They've been a little bit down in terms of like their raw numbers for linebackers this season, but I think that's a little fluky. Part of that is just their overall tackle volume is still way, way down. So they're barely above average on raw tackles. But if you look at like the average tackle group or linebacker group averages 27.8% of the tackles per game. Well, teams against or linebacker groups against the Ravens still this year, and what's considered maybe a down year for them, it's 30.47. So they're still an above average from a per snap rate. So if we get a little bit more efficiency from the Ravens offense, they start running a few more plays, a little bit more efficient with the pass. I mean, we're looking at double digits, tackle upside here. We know the big play upside is there. We saw it in the Colts game in a spot where we started to get a little bit more playing time there. So yeah, the ceiling for Payton Wilson is always exciting.
Yeah. And the whole Cole Holcomb, like resurgence and stuff, like kudos to him for making a comeback and stuff like that. But like, it was just killing our Payton Wilson chairs. So yeah, let's get him a full-time role here. So
yeah, and they can mix him in, whatever it'll be, Malik Harrison, whatever else they're going to do, they'll mix in some other guys, but it feels like based off what they did against Buffalo, that it should be full-time Payton Wilson. I think the ceiling for that's very, very high. Yeah. As you touched on the top, like this is the type of like swing and a miss that I'm willing to take in week 14 because the return could be very, very high.
And the miss isn't going to be a 0. It's going to be, the floor is there in a play like this. So kind of going along with your Baltimore take, is Lamar Jackson okay? Are we safe to fire him up as a quarterback this week, or what's going on? He's had 3 in a row single-digit performances, and he's just, now's not the time to have that in your lineup. I know. The offensive line's obviously not nearly as sharp. It looks like maybe Derrick Henry's been dinged up and lost a step there. It's tough. I mean, you just kind of continue to wait for them to flip the switch, and it's not really happening. So
I feel like that's another scenario where, man, you'd feel like you'd have egg on your face by leaving him on the bench, depending on the other option that you have. So probably have to start him. But yeah, I mean, chances are you're probably not in a really high leverage situation this week if you have Lamar, because you probably hurt you at this point of the season and not even get you in the playoffs anyway.
Yeah. All right. That's another show altogether. But I'm going to stick with the Wilson train here, and I'm going to go with Eric Wilson, linebacker for the Minnesota Vikings. And I know that Nate Landman has already been crowned the Zach Baun of the season, and kudos to him for getting a nice contract. But Eric Wilson would like to enter the chat on this conversation. Since he took over the linebacker 2 role in week 2, he's had 78 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. That's good for linebacker 13 in Big 3 scoring. This is actually his second tour of duty with Minnesota, and he now has the most tackles in 2025 than he did since his 2020 season when he had 121 tackles. So the tackle floor is there, and by far this is career numbers with sacks and forced fumbles for him this season, and he's really flourishing in that Brian Flores' defense. He had a monster game last week with 11 tackles and a sack for 27 points in Big 3 scoring. They get Washington this week, who is crazy that they are the best matchup for opposing linebackers going into this game with 18.7 tackles per game. And that number jumps to 22 tackles per game over the last 3 games. 32.1% of their tackles have been going to the opposing linebackers this season. They're running the ball with Rodriguez. They have those RPOs with Mariota, or however you want to say it. And then Zach Ertz has kind of come alive here, thrown across the middle of the field, right where Wilson is going to be playing a lot. Getting McLaurin back doesn't directly impact Eric Wilson because we're not going to see Eric Wilson out there covering McLaurin on plays, but that does keep drives extended, and those are going to lead us to more volume. The Vikings offense is really gross right now. I know that they're going to get JJ McCarthy or Agent 9 or whatever you want to call him back in here. But Ryan, are you a game script guy when you go into creating projections and things like that? Because we haven't seen the Minnesota Vikings offense be fruitful in a long time. And because of that, the defense has been like really, really thriving for us in fantasy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to build out projections, you have to be mindful of plays. It's really how, the projection process starts for the week is not only looking at obviously the players, projected playing time and number of snaps played, but really got to start at a team level to get there. And that's definitely where, good projections and good bets can die, where you just have, game scripts get completely out of whack. I love your point on McLaurin being actually an additive to Eric Wilson, because it's not even like necessarily a direct correlation in terms of where he operates or that we're going to have Wilson tackling Terry McLaurin. But part of it is we need guys to stay on the field. Right. So if we're getting all these 3 and outs, that doesn't help us very much. We do need kind of, to balance that situation where, we're going to get sustained drives and, get those spots where we can, get into the high tackle game and raise those floors. So, yeah, I think that's a great call out. It matters a ton. This is a weird game, and that helps a little bit too. So I don't think we're in a situation where you're going to, have one team dominating time of possession. To your point, definitely has not been Minnesota. It doesn't seem like there's anything built in that version of Minnesota that they're going to play keep away so much that we're not going to get Eric Wilson on the field.
Yeah. And he's been like doing so well in the pass rushing game and getting home with sacks and things like that. He's definitely, Cashman is having a great season in his own right, but he's more like that tackle floor guy, the high volume of tackles, whereas we're getting the big splash plays from Wilson this year. I think he's leading the team actually in sacks. So, with Grenard having a down season, Van Ginkel kind of having that neck injury and stuff like that, I think that he's definitely been a big piece for the Vikings defense.
Yeah. A lot of Caden Ellis in there too, with the Zach Baun comp, right? Where they just have some of those splash plays, which are really nice for you depending on your scoring.
Yes. I'm a big Caden Ellis fan. So
yeah.
Switching to the defensive backs here, we got an oldie but a goodie here for our defensive back. Who's that defensive back you like this week?
Started slow for us this year, but has come along nicely. And we've seen the box snap rate, which we love at safety, come along with it, and that is Budda Baker. It's a fantastic matchup for Budda Baker against the Rams. The Rams giving up on average 15.9 tackles per game to the position. League average, just a tip above 13. So almost 3 full tackles on average, and the highest tackle rate as well. So that plays out in both 26.95% of the tackles coming from opposing safety groups, which is rare to see a team like the Rams, like it's almost 2.5% more to the safety group than it is the linebacker group. So it is a little bit disjointed. So it's a great spot. And again, Budda is going to be able to, I love these box safeties because the game script doesn't matter, right? If it's a situation where the team is going to be running heavy, Budda is going to live in the box as that, third, sometimes second linebacker for the way that we know that the Cardinals like to play. And then if it's a pass heavy game script, which we know the Rams like to do, he's in play for those plays over the middle. He's in play everywhere. So it's a great spot. And again, we talked earlier about Byron Young and the play volume in that spot. We talked about the assist rate there in that matchup as well. So many signals pointing to Budda Baker being an absolutely great play this week.
I love this call too because of the revenge game narrative, and not so much the Rams revenging against the Cardinals this week, but revenging against last week's showing against the Panthers. I think they're going to come out with something to prove this week. That offense is going to be a little more clicking this week. I think practice this week is going to be a little more up tempo, and I think McVay is going to get the boys ready to go, and that's going to be great to see a bunch of Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, the 38 tight ends that they have on that offense, and Budda Baker is going to be right there soaking it up. So I love this call.
Yeah, there's just so many outs when we get these box safeties, especially when we get an up-tempo pace-up spot for, how the Cardinals are playing as well, right? They're pass-heavy. We've seen a lot of efficiency from Jacoby Brissett, but obviously we know incomplete passes stop the clock. That helps us create a higher play volume and more tackle opportunities as well. So lots of different ways that we get really good Budda Baker performance.
Yeah, and with almost a 49-point over/under this week, that's a recipe for success on both sides of the ball. So
love it.
All right, I'm going to go to my defensive back, and this is probably a little bit deeper of a call out here. This is probably for a defensive back 3-4, but I'm going to go with Cam Bynum this week, safety for the Indianapolis Colts. They get a great matchup this week against the Jaguars. The Jaguars and the Colts are actually number 2 and number 3 for favorable matchups for opposing safeties this season. Both teams are giving up a little bit north of 25% of tackle opportunities to the safeties this season, with more than 16 per game. Bynum himself is coming off a great game last week against Houston with 6 tackles and a pick of CJ Stroud. And I can see a very similar stat line for him this week going up against the generational, and I use that term loosely, Trevor Lawrence. I could see him definitely having another 6 tackle, pass defense game, maybe even a pick in this one. This is a really big game as far as the conference goes. So I think both teams are going to really be coming this week to win. The PFF metrics look really great for Bynum this season. He's having his best tackle season in his 5-year career. He really cleaned up the missed tackles, which was giving him kind of fits earlier in his career. And right now he's ranked 21st out of 95 safeties this season. So that's a really high floor for him. He's playing nearly 100% of snaps, and over the last 4 games, he's only missed 1 snap in a game a couple weeks ago, and that's exactly what we want from our defensive back position. Don't sell yourself short by playing an 80 or 85% defensive back when there are so many 100% snap guys out there. He does play a little bit deep with a majority of his snaps, but I think that the Jaguars' offense with Jacoby Myers, Parker Washington, Strange is coming along at the tight end position, and hopefully a little Brian Thomas could be back in that offense. I think he could see a little bit more action deep this week. So I like Cam Bynum as probably more than a defensive back 3-4 where he's kind of being listed right now.
Yeah, I like the call out too. They said the matchup is there. Another play volume standpoint, where I think we could see these teams, just the way that the offenses are going to interact. Again, a 1.5 point total should be a close game. So I like the call out.
All right. Before we flip the script here, Ryan, and go to our players that we're kind of fading this week, just recap the defensive linemen. We've got actually kind of teased out a little bit of a prop bet here with Byron Young and Jared Verse, both on the tackles for this week. So if you're into that kind of thing, kind of look at those lines. So Byron Young, Jonathan Cooper at the defensive line, the Wilson not-so brothers, Payton and Eric this week at the linebackers, Budda Baker and Cam Bynum at the defensive backs. So when we look at players we're fading, we're not necessarily saying that these players are not startable, again, depending on your league size, but sometimes we get ourselves into trouble thinking a player is going to be a defensive lineman 1 or defensive line 2, and they kind of don't show up because of matchup or whatever reason. So just kind of take it with a grain of salt. When we say fade them, that doesn't mean we don't start them. It just might mean like tempering expectations, and maybe you do a little something different with your roster construction for the week. Ryan kind of teased out, depending on if he needs a home run, he might be a higher upside play, or if you need a high floor guy, some of these players might be that kind of play for you this week. So Ryan, who's a defensive lineman that you're kind of like tempering expectations on this week?
Yeah, this is going to be hard because, Josh Sweat is in a nice little run right now. There's a lot of sack regression to be had coming into the season. That's kind of coming to fruition. It's in a nice little sack run right now, but I think the spot is a little bit tricky. The Rams are the worst matchup for opposing defensive ends in terms of tackle floor. 9.66% of all tackles against the Rams have come from defensive end, is by far the lowest in the league. The raw numbers are not much better. Again, about 2.5 tackles below the standard average. And again, they're just giving up 17 sacks on the season. This is the third fewest in the league. Pressure rate's also top 5. And then Matthew Stafford's pressure to sack rate is significantly below league average as well. So it's just kind of a combination here where the low floor from a tackle standpoint and the matchup here, even though we're going to have a lot of plays and probably a lot of dropbacks, I just think that there's probably less likely that Sweat gets home with the sack, and we just don't have much of a tackle floor. It's a tough one.
Where are you comfortable? DL 2, 3, 4. Are you comfortable with Sweat as a starter for you this week?
It's probably a low end 2, maybe high end 3. Depending on the depth of your league and depending on what you need. I understand to your point, if you're kind of cooking with him, it's going to be hard for you to sit him.
Yes.
But at the same time, you might want to look for someone else depending on what you need this week to maybe be a little bit more of a swing for the weeks, because I just don't think that we're going to see the production that we've seen from him as of late.
Yeah. And the dangerous part about doing these fades is, these players obviously listen to the show. They use it as motivation. So he's going to come out and have a great game this week. So,
True.
So it happens. So we're just doing your team a favor by calling these players out.
Still think you're great. It's been awesome to see you bounce back, Josh. Just a tougher matchup for you this week, bud.
Still on the Christmas list, so you're still getting a Christmas card, so don't worry about it. One player that I'm a little down on this week is going to be Greg Rousseau of the Buffalo Bills versus the Cincinnati Bengals. And it's not because of the snaps this season. He's played more than 52% of snaps in every single game. He's played the most number of snaps on the team at the defensive line position with 466 snaps. Even his PFF metrics are glowing this season with an 85.4 overall grade. By far his best tackle percentage of his career too. But why the fade this week? It has more to do with the matchup. And Fantasy Pros right now has him ranked as the defensive lineman 23 this week. And even with 4 teams on a bye, I'm not sure he's a defensive lineman 3 or 4 for me this week. He only has 89 points in Big 3 scoring this season with 36 tackles, 3 sacks, and a forced fumble. Probably going to be his lowest scoring season of his career, of his 5-year career, and that's including his rookie season. Last year, he had 8 sacks. This season, he only has 33 pressures and 3 sacks, which is about half of what he had the entire last season, and we only have a handful of games left to go. So, Ryan, you kind of mentioned it earlier about being able to pivot from players and not just kind of sticking your head in the sand and going forward with a player that's not producing. Interceptions are a sticky stat. Sacks are a sticky stat. And for whatever reason, Greg Rousseau is just not getting them this year like he did in previous seasons. I kind of mentioned the matchup this week. The Bengals last week gave up 0 sacks, and I think that's kind of a game plan going forward with getting Burrow back. I don't think they don't want him obviously to take any hits, but I think more so now coming off that foot injury, they're going to do a lot of quick passes and get rid of the ball quickly to not give those defensive linemen a chance to hit Burrow. And I think that's going to be kind of the expectation this week for that offense going forward this week against the Bills. So for those reasons, fading Greg Rousseau more so than other weeks.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot. Like you said, that you probably in some scenarios have to play him, but I think tempering the expectations is probably the right approach.
It just is. It's so weird from season to season how a player can be, outside of the Myles Garretts of the world and things like that, how, they can ebb and flow so much from season to season, so, being able to find that lightning in a bottle from one season to the next is really, really important. And, as we preach on the show all the time, this is a great opportunity to sell high. And Greg Rousseau is probably going to be a great buy low candidate this season. The manager sitting with Rousseau is probably going to be a little disappointed. And so you might be able to get him at a reduced price. And, he might have a great bounce back season next year.
Yeah, it's really going to lean on the metrics that I think matter. And those aren't often the things that we're actually looking at in terms of IDP scoring. So you got to do a little bit of work or trust us to do the work for you. And some of the things that are a little bit more bankable week in and week out that will eventually, ideally lead to the IDP scoring that we want. And Rousseau's had a lot of that this year, and it's had more of it in years past without some of the IDP production. It looked like we were trending earlier in the year. They were going to kind of marry and meet in the middle, but slow down a little bit. So still a good player, but definitely not the appeal that we thought we were going to have coming into the year.
Yeah, exactly. All right, switching to the Cadillac position of IDP, the linebackers. And this is definitely a name that has been a lightning rod this season for IDP managers. And that linebacker is?
It's Daiyan Henley. It's been really painful this year. Was a big fan coming out of Washington State. I was really excited for him to get an opportunity last year. Made me a lot of money, especially early, because I thought that there was some real good tackle upside there when he first started to kick around and get some meaningful snaps. He finished the season last year with 84 solo tackles, his 10th most in the league. He doesn't even have 84 combined tackles so far this season. And I know the season's not over, but we're pretty close. That's just a massive disappointment. And again, now we have the worst matchup for all linebackers in the league as the Philadelphia Eagles. Linebacker groups against the Eagles averaging just a combined 12.6 tackles per game. It is 4 full tackles below the league average. And then the tackle rate just 22.58%. Again, 5% below the league average. So a really tough spot. And then we have the Chargers, who are annually the weighted assist model that I use for my tackle projections. Sometimes there's a lot of variance in that. It might not be scorekeeper related. Sometimes it could just be situational. Well, the Chargers one feels as bankable as possible. They are consistently one of the worst. I have them 31st in weighted assist rate. So we have just another kind of dock here in Henley's raw combined tackles in this matchup against the Eagles. So tough spot, not playing with a lot of pace on Philadelphia's side, a team who's not really sustaining a lot of drives. They're not running the football well. They don't really work over the middle of the field from a passing standpoint. They're working really on the outside. So a lot of things that point to a down day for Henley again.
I love the point that you're making about the matchup. How much of a factor, Ryan, is that for you kind of going into like your projections? We've mentioned it numerous times on the shows over the weeks. Minnesota is like the worst matchup for opposing, safeties, opposing defensive linemen, because they just don't sustain drives. Is that a big factor for you when making projections and bet props?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm looking at, snaps in the game. I want to look at, player level performance. And then I'm trying to make adjustments. I'm trying to regress to the mean a little bit. So I don't want to take, the stuff that we're kind of referencing. Some of that is a little bit more descriptive than predictive, right? When we reference like the raw tackles per game, I do want to kind of try to look at a bigger picture and regress that to the mean a little bit. So there's a little bit of, math and stuff that makes it a little bit tricky there. But again, when we get into week 14, it feels a little bit more sticky. And then when you have some trends that kind of go back in terms of play caller, core offensive players, quarterback specific, where you start to see these things, these threads kind of tie through over multiple seasons, then I feel a little bit less likely that I need to do a full regression, and I will bank on what we continue to see being the true indicator of what we should expect there. So it matters a ton. So we kind of have a couple of things here. It's really hard to look at. All right, not a lot of tackles against the Eagles, underperforming linebacker, and we have this assist situation here too. So we're kind of checking all the boxes for a fade or an under or a situation that it doesn't look good. Where I'm like, the chances for me to regress to like a league average performance here get harder because we have all these things kind of working against Henley.
Yep. And it's been a big thing for me this season too, is trusting data more so in making decisions. There's always going to be an outlier that's going to break. Daiyan Henley could go out and have a great game this week. But 14 weeks or 13 weeks of data right now are kind of showing that it's not going to happen. It could happen. I got busted a couple weeks ago. Jack Campbell was a fade against the Vikings. Just not a great matchup for all week. Jack Campbell went out and had a great game.
Yep.
Kudos to him. But 11 other linebackers that went up against the Vikings all season didn't have a great game. So there's going to be those weeks that you're going to miss, but kind of trust in the process more so over the length of the season, especially when you have these data points. So
I think it's the right way to do it, Jeff. We can only we have to make the decision in the moment. And it's very
Yep.
easy to have the hindsight analysis. And like, Jack Campbell's a great player, but at the same time, like depending on what your roster would look like and the other opportunities that you had, sometimes we have to make tough decisions, and sometimes you're going to miss leaning on the data, but we have the data and we have to lean on it. Right. So if I'm thinking of, from a betting standpoint, it's a little bit different than making start sit decisions for your IDP lineups. A little bit harder to take those misses, but like I have to look at the betting standpoint over the course of a 22-week NFL season. I can't get lost in having a bad week. Like I loved Jalen Ramsey under, like he opened at like 6.5 tackles and assists last week against the Bills, who have massively, opposing safeties have massively underperformed. Bad alignments, bad scorekeeper, lots of situations. Well, he went out and had 9 tackles. Well, it wasn't a bad read. It was just a bet that lost. So, sometimes that's harder for people. And I understand that. And again, you don't have the ability to make up for that the following week sometimes in your, fantasy league, but you have to use the data that you have to make decisions. Use it as much as you can, as much as you're comfortable with, but I think ignoring it, I think is a mistake.
Yep. Love that. Love that take. All right, my linebacker to fade this week is Barrett Carter, and I just don't understand the logic here. I've seen Carter right now over on Fantasy Pros. He's ranked as the linebacker 13 this week, and that's just crazy to me to be a back-end LB1, LB2. Carter is absolute cheeks this season. I use that term affectionately. That's what all my students say when they don't like something. This is cheeks, Mr. P. So we're going to throw that in here. Carter's absolute cheeks this year. His PFF score right now is an abysmal 36.9 overall. That ranks him 82nd out of 84 linebackers this season. He's missed 14 tackles already this year. That's a 15.6 missed tackle rate. So he's not even doing himself any favors when he does get an opportunity, depending on your league scoring. That's 28 more points that he's left on the field. We just can't have that. The Bengals have to play him though, because there is literally no one else. They traded away Logan Wilson, and choosing to pay their offensive pieces over kind of retaining some of these defensive pieces seems to be the theme going forward for the Bengals. The Bills just played Pittsburgh last week, and they had this game won early, 26-7. So they were running the ball a lot late in this one. I'm not sure the game script this week is going to be the same, because the Bengals offense can actually move the ball. So I don't see the Bills running as much. I think there's going to be a little more dependent on the throw. The Bills offensive line is no joke either. They're a really good unit. So getting a sack this week is probably going to be out of the question for Barrett Carter. So Carter's probably no better than an LB3 this week for me based on just volume alone. And I'm probably avoiding starting him in two linebacker leagues. I think I can find a better pivot there.
Yeah, it's been bad. I mean, I liked that they, wanted to see what they had with some of their young guys, but man, it's they saw it. So
we saw
I
it
got
too.
the answer, right? Like, we got to do that. We got to do that part of it. But sometimes when you see it, you gotta be like, all right, that's not good enough. And it doesn't seem like it's good enough. There's a lot of stuff to clean up there. So I know on the IDP side, we like the tackle production. That's been okay. But these are the things that we were talking about earlier that make it really hard, especially if you're in like a dynasty league where it's going to be really hard for him to continue to earn playing time. It's been pretty rough. So, and then Buffalo dead last in adjusted assist rate that I have over, using the last 3 years. So 40.62%, again, comfortably below the NFL average, which is about 49.5%. So if you're looking for extra tackles to steal some of those assists here and there, Buffalo seems to be the wrong place to look.
Ryan, if you were to walk up to someone on the street and explain to them what adjusted assist tackles meant, how would you explain that to someone?
I didn't even tell my friends in the space about this, Jeff. It's like sometimes people they want to see. I'm lucky enough to a buddy works at ESPN was writing a piece this offseason about projections and how projections have been a real impactful piece in the space of the last few years. And he's like, you're the only psychopath that I know that's doing the tackle projections to the level that you're doing them. Can I look through your stuff? Can we talk about it, to write this piece? And I'm walking him through it, and he's just like, you are a psychopath. Like, I didn't realize that it was this deep. I'm like, look, IDP is not for everyone. We definitely are a different breed. If you're listening, Jeff and I love you. We appreciate that.
Especially in week 14. If you're still listening by week 14, thank you.
Correct. I put it in my articles at 4 for 4. I'm like, hey, look, people tell you that no one cares about your fantasy team. I care. Send it to me. I want to see what you're working with. What kind of decisions do we have to make down the stretch? Let's get you a championship because I feel like our community is a little bit different. So look, I'm trying to win money in the betting space. I don't want to leave any stone unturned. And if there's some actionable, and I believe any sort of like data set like this at the tails is actionable, right? When you get into the middle and you want to get into the situation of like, this team is 12th in weighted assists over the last 3 years, and this team is 22nd, that might be a lot of noise. But if I have 5 years of data, I'm really using 3 in the model, but I'll reference the other couple of years as well to see if there's any, strings that tie through. But if like I have a really strong situation where like Detroit, the home team, they're really tight. They don't give a lot of assists to the home team. The visitors, they give assists at a high rate year in and year out. To me, there's some actionable data there when I'm making a tackle projection that I want to adjust and account for. The Bills versus what happens in Washington or Indy. Those are some really, like the Rams, those are high assist rates. So with the tails in particular, I feel like that's really actionable. And if we're talking about, a tackle projection where it's a fine line between it being positive expected value and negative, those little things count. So yeah, I try not to tell anyone about weighted assist rates, Jeff, but I feel like this is a pretty safe group.
This is a safe place. So, all right. Defensive backs that we're not fans of this week, and you've got a cornerback slot corner here, Marlon Humphrey. Why are you not a fan of him this week?
Coming off a great week too. I think he was top 5 in most scoring formats last week. But to your point with the alignment, we're seeing far less of those slot snaps as of late with the Eloy Gilman acquisition, what they've done with Kyle Hamilton. So we're seeing some more traditional out wide boundary snaps for Humphrey, and that's obviously not as great for us in IDP. Right, you're at that point really relying on an efficient passing offense. It's playing Pittsburgh, so we don't have that. Or waiting on like pick sixes and stuff like that, which is just really fleeting to lean in on. So while he is coming off of a great week, I think it's going to be really, really hard for him to replicate that because, again, that was against 46 Joe Burrow dropbacks. We've seen by far the worst tackle rates for opposing corners this season against the Steelers. Aaron Rodgers isn't taking any sacks. He's desperate to get the ball up before he can get hit. So any sort of like, edge snaps or, edge blitz that we could possibly see that can raise the floor or ceiling for Humphreys, just really lower here too. So a lot of volatility at the position, easy to fade coming off of, or tough to fade coming off of a great week, but I think it's the right call here.
Yeah, I agree with that. And for the exact same reason, I got Will Harris this week as my defensive back to fade. Again, kind of the mantra, fade Minnesota, fade the matchup. Minnesota has been a bread and butter for this to avoid this year on the show. And until they show us something different, we're just going to kind of stay on the course. Last week, Seattle played 52 snaps on defense. Their corners showed out really well, picking off Brosmer numerous times, but the safeties could only muster 6 combined tackles between Nick Emanwari and Okada. Harris is going into a second game coming off the IR stint, and sometimes we need some time to get back those NFL legs underneath our players and things like that. So Harris was kind of my breakout guy at the defensive back position to start the season, but injuries have kind of derailed that and hasn't really come to fruition this year. The defense as a whole is kind of in a rough spot. They don't have a lot of pass rushing, which kind of really affects the back end of that defense. And I don't think that the Minnesota Vikings are the team that's going to fix that this week. We're going to get McCarthy back under center, and I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing for our defensive backs this week. Those sustained drives just aren't there. Justin Jefferson is a player that I've seen on a lot of benches, and who would have thought that we lived in a world where, Justin Jefferson would be sitting on benches, or is he a start-sit question at this point in the season? So here we are. Avoid the matchups versus Minnesota this week.
Yeah, we're not even sure that we're getting 100% snap rate, which, again, you typically want to have that too with, Reeves played pretty well, Quan Martin, and they kind of mess around even with their snap rates. So really hard in a tough matchup to start a guy where you're not even sure that he's going to get, 90+% of the snaps. So good call.
Yeah, and even in a week with 4 teams on a bye, and we've got some great teams on buys with some great secondary pieces, it's even tough to even like justify a Will Harris this week, even with those 4 teams on a bye. We kind of look at, some of those teams that are on a bye this week between Carolina. We're obviously missing Merrick here. We got the Patriots. We got the Giants and San Francisco on a bye this week. So even with those teams out, Will Harris kind of becomes like, ugh. As a 4, maybe I'm okay with it, but anything higher than that, he's just not going to cut it for me this week.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So just to recap some players that were fading this week, I know they're all listening: Josh Sweat and Greg Rousseau, Daiyan Henley, Barrett Carter, Marlon Humphrey, and Will Harris. Now, before we end the show here, Ryan, we're going to go into a segment where we're going to kind of talk about a player that we are just having a hard time figuring out for whatever reason. And who's that player for you this week?
It's not even the player's fault. Super excited that DeMarvion Overshown is back. But I just don't seem to know what we're doing with a 5-man rotation on linebacker. I feel like we all know that it's not Kenneth Murray, but some reason we're still getting a lot of Kenneth Murray snaps. It's actually still a gift in the, betting prop space, because for some reason the books will line him as if he's getting a full allotment of snaps. And they don't even realize that that's usually like maybe 5 tackles. It's not great. So we want full Overshown. And then if you want to rotate the guy next to him, right? Because the upside, both from this is another guy that we were touching on earlier that has that Eric Wilson, Caden Ellis type stuff, right? Where we can get the splash plays from him. It's a fantastic rusher from the linebacker position. The tackle floor is pretty solid, it looks like. And again, we only got a small glimpse of it last year, but it was starting to really trend up as he went down. So he's like, I very much see him being a guy where at this point they maybe just flip and give him 100% of the snaps. And like, he'd be a guy that you would hate to leave on your bench. If you're in a spot this week and he's on your roster and you're considering him and you kind of need a home run, maybe you're an underdog, you need some points, I'd give him a look, because there's a chance here where, again, good matchup against the Lions on Thursday night. The upside here is pretty massive because he can get you big plays. And then we can, stumble in a situation where they just decided that they've seen enough. He's their best linebacker, and they're going to figure out what to do with the linebacker next to him. So I don't know. He's really hard to project. I just kind of have to, throw my hands up and be like, yeah, maybe 75% of the snaps again, which may be less, but he's really tough. But I think he's a nice, really solid swing if you need help.
He definitely is probably a linebacker to buy right now too, just because of that massive upside. And maybe they're kind of taking a kid glove approach, after he's coming back from that knee injury, kind of like slowly getting him up to speed. It was kind of a head scratcher when they made the trade for Logan Wilson. I think that was just like, Cincinnati was just like, whatever you'll give us, just let's get moving on from him. Just like you said, there's 5 players already there. And when you have 5, you have none. So kind of a tough situation. Yeah.
And we, in our space, know what Logan Wilson is at this point.
Yes.
And like the media wants to tell us like, oh, like Cowboys are a different defense. So they went out and got Logan Wilson. It's like, he got benched.
Yep.
In Cincinnati, guys. Like, we can't highlight the Logan Wilson move as something that like we need to give the Cowboys credit for. Yep. We're talking about a historically bad defense. This gentleman, no offense, Logan Wilson, was great for a little bit. We all have it. Jeff and I we're on the wrong side of 40, I feel like. So like, we all lose a step at some point. Yep. Logan Wilson's not on the wrong side of 40. They lost a step. He's just not that guy anymore. So we have to move on from that, realize who we are. And this is not a spot we need to be celebrating. Like, let's see what we got next to him, but let's not mess it up and just take Overshown off the field to make sure we get Logan Wilson and, Kenneth Murray snaps. It's tough.
When the team trades away Logan Wilson and they decided to retain the 82nd and like 81st linebackers in the league, that's kind of telling.
It's telling. Yeah.
There's something there. There's something there. All right. I'm probably going to get fired for this because last week I was bashing a couple of the big boys with Cole Bishop. And I know that those were high names for the boys on the big show, but here's another one. Derwin James. I don't know what's going on with Derwin James this year. He was almost my fade this week. He was drafted as a top 5 defensive back this year. He was also one of those rare defensive back that were drafted in those D-up drafts when very few defensive backs were taken, but it just hasn't been the return this year that we were hoping for. He has 125 points right now in Big 3 scoring, good for defensive back 25. And most of those points were scored in the first 6 games. He started out amazingly well. First 5 games of the season, 5 of the first 6 were double digit. But since week 7, he has only had 1 double digit game, and that came in week 9 versus Tennessee of all teams, where he got 10.25 points. So he just barely had a double digit game in that one. Last week, he only had 2 tackles and a half a sack, good for 5.75 points in Big 3 scoring. If he didn't have the name Derwin James, looking at his stats, he probably would be definitely on benches, and he definitely might be on the waiver wire in some leagues because he's just not getting it done. Does this have more to do with the father time? Like you mentioned, we all lost a step. I think I've lost more than one. Is this, 8 years in the league? Is it finally catching up with him? Is it an injury that he's coming off of? Is there a chance for this rebound, Ryan? Where are you at with Derwin James?
He is hard. He is very hard because there is upside there based off the alignment, but at the same time, there's less floor based on the alignment too, right? Like it's nice to have the ability for him to get those sacks, but he's just playing far fewer traditional box safety snaps and alignment there. So it's a combination of a bunch of things. I think you make a great point. It's like the Marvin Harrison Jr. discussion, right? If it was Fred Smith, we would not be talking about him like that. But his dad's in the Ring of Honor and the Hall of Fame, and things are a little bit different. And like Derwin James has earned that at this point. There's still, he's been a big time performer for any of us that have been doing this for a little bit. He's fantastic all timer, but we're just not getting it right now, and we have to sometimes separate what someone was. We don't get aura points for what he did 5 years ago, right? So we need winning points, and you're just not getting it enough currently. So probably a great dynasty sell. And he's a tough start this week for sure. Yeah. Even in a good matchup on paper, I guess, against the Eagles, who have been, okay to safeties. But again, he's playing such a non-traditional safety role that I don't even know that he benefits from that. Like I didn't give him the safety bump that I give, safeties against the Eagles because of where he aligns. Yeah.
He's almost like that linebacker too for the Chargers. What a disappointing unit the Chargers have been this year. We had Daiyan Henley. We had high hopes for him. Obviously, Derwin James is there. They had pieces along the defensive line that we were kind of hopeful for, but just tough stuff there for the city.
It seemed good. I feel like the Khalil Mack injury early just kind of like it was a trickle down effect, and just never really kind of caught ground after that.
Yep. So Ryan, this has been absolutely amazing. This has been one of my favorite shows. We've talked a lot about different prop bets and a lot of different things. What is some words of wisdom? You've been playing fantasy football for a long time. You've been doing the prop bets and things like that for a long time too. What is something that you could offer to our listeners as far as help for, heading into the playoffs? What's helped you been successful in playoffs? Or maybe as a team that's maybe not doing so well, what's your approach right before the trade deadline?
Yeah, I think, we touched on at the beginning. I think just never rest on your laurels. I think always trying to be an active participating owner. Look to always be, improving your roster. And look at the bankable stuff, right? Depending on the position, the tackles at the, linebacker position, where we're going to get some of the splash plays. You're going to get some random interceptions, right? It's really nice when, Bo Nix drills Bobby Wagner between the 5 and 4, but we can't project that moving forward. We don't expect that a lot, right? And it wasn't anything that Bobby Wagner did. He just literally drew it back because it was in the right spot. So those things are really hard. So the bankable things that we can predict, the alignment position for the defensive backs, the guys that can win up front, right? Is that the position more dependent on you being better than the guy in front of you, being able to win, being a part of a good system and those things. And lean on data. Don't be afraid of data. I think looking at IDP box scores and IDP fantasy points, you will not find that in anything that I write about. Not because I don't think there's any value there, but I think it's just super descriptive and not very predictive. I don't think it really tells the reader about how the player plays, how the game played out. I think it just is very very noisy driven way to kind of give analysis. So I'm not writing about fantasy points. I'm not writing about where a guy ranks in terms of other defensive linemen. I want to think about his matchup, his baseline performance, and what I think the actual game environment could do for him this week. So try to find some content out in the space that I think, encapsulates that a little bit better than telling you about, This guy being, the linebacker 6 over the course of the last 12 weeks. I don't think that really helps most fantasy owners.
And if anybody has read any of your work or watched any of the videos that you've done, Ryan, they can definitely tell that is definitely where your resources come from and the very actionable steps that they can take. So before we put a ribbon on this episode, Ryan, what are you working on right now, and where can the audience find some more of your fantastic work?
Appreciate that, Jeff. 4for4.com. A couple IDP articles every week, along with rankings. I get into all the specific matchup stuff on top of, waiver wire column. I have a matchup article that'll kind of highlight some of the best sack matchups. A lot of it still is skewed through the lens of, betting content manager at 4for4 as well. So we're trying to find ways to take advantage of the sack market in prop space, tackles and assists, obviously, as we've talked about a bunch here from a betting standpoint as well. We're really trying to actually expand the pretty big off-season projects to try to expand the IDP offering at 4for4 in the off-season a little bit more than we've done in the last handful of years. And then some more customizable things that aren't just on the back end for me, but that we can get into the hands of our subscribers over at 4for4 for next year as well. So really excited about the group and the team over there wanting to lean a little bit more into the IDP space.
So you had mentioned a little bit, you're on Twitter too a little bit. What's your handle there in case friends want to reach out?
Yep, at Ryan Noonan, RYNOONAN. And then if you're into betting at all, Move the Line is our betting podcast at 4for4. We have a Monday show where we kind of recap what happened and look at the week ahead, and then a prop show on Friday. Both of those are at 3 p.m. Eastern. And then 4for4 bets on YouTube channel, Move the Line, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Awesome stuff. That's going to do it for this episode of the IDP After Show. I want to thank Ryan once again for coming on and sharing some of his fantastic knowledge about the game that we all love. I think that we all are a better fantasy football manager having listening to tonight's episode. If you aren't doing so already, please make sure you hit that like and notification button. But most importantly, if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button so that you're alerted to all the great content that the IDP show puts out all week long. Join me next time as we get ourselves ready for the fantasy football playoffs with some guy that knows a lot about green dots, Mr. Mike Woolert. He's going to join me, and we're going to break down all the important information for week 15 of the fantasy football season. Until then, for Ryan and myself, we say thank you for joining us and best of luck to you and your teams in week 14.
This was the IDP After Show.